I'm Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. It is not anti-Semitic to point out that certain elites throughout history, including the Khazar ruling class, have strategically adopted Judaism not as a matter of faith, but as a tool for political sovereignty, identity control, and economic insulation. Just as the Vatican weaponized Christianity to justify imperial expansion and the British crown cloaked colonization in divine monarchy, some elite families used Jewish identity not to elevate a people, but to shield their own power. Critiquing those historical power moves is not a hatred of Jews. It is a rejection of using any religion, Judaism included, as a camouflage for conquest, manipulation, and unearned legitimacy. If you can call out papal tyranny without being anti-Christian or condemn Western colonialism without being anti-European, then you can damn well expose elite identity fraud without being anti-Semitic. The real anti-Semitism is pretending all Jewish people share the guilt of a few who turned sacred identity into a political weapon. There's my disclaimer. All right. Hi. Happy Sunday, everybody. So before we get started, I'm going to say hello to some people who are in here. Adrian is here first. He says it's on. Auntie is here. Hi with the peace sign. Spain Man is here. He says greetings and salutations, Maggie and fellow tribesmen and women. Auntie wants to be called High Priestess because she's from the Druid line. Chef Mike is here. Good afternoon to you too. Leon is here. Hi, Leon. And Adric says, let's hear it for the dancing Maggies. So to help us to start catching up and summarizing how we've gotten to this point so far, I'm just going to play a little video. I'm going to add to it. And then we're going to be joined by Adrian Hicks. So let's get started.
Say, well, big deal. So what? Why is history important at all? History is extremely important. Imagine if I could take from each one of you as an individual everything you knew about your life up to last week and just erase it. Where would you be? You'd be lost. You'd be incompetent. You wouldn't know how to plan for the future. And you do the same thing with a people. If you erase their history or you don't tell enough about their past, they also become incompetent and they can't fulfill the future. And that's why a lot of people in the black community have felt, well, how come all of the dreams of the civil rights movement aren't yet fulfilled? And one reason is because this history is still suppressed. That long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas, for totally different reasons, totally separated from each other by many centuries. Well, this trade stopped abruptly 1600 AD. 1600 AD, the Spanish, the Portuguese run a real aggressive colonizing campaign, and they took over Africa, and they destroyed a lot of these kingdoms. And with the destruction of these kingdoms went all the knowledge and all the history of these past trades. The southern coast of California, he was a member of the Chumash, no longer exist. When the Spaniards met up with these people, they said, these are civilized Indians. They got along extremely well with them. Last of them is about the mid of the early 19th century. They were a black people who built fantastic boats. They were like Viking boats, believe it or not. They were lab-straked, over one plank over the other, so they were very resilient in the water. They had a tradition that they did not originate in America. They came from this great island out across the Pacific, and they lived in a number of islands off of California. One of them was Santa Barbara. You've heard that, Santa Barbara. And they called Santa Barbara Limu. That was their name for it. So this man, probably the last of the Chumash, one of the last of the Chumash, represents one of these people from Mu, the very early times. I don't know. The government is very hard to second guess, you know. So our opposition, or the only opposition we found to this, really comes not from the government, but from old-style archaeologists. The reason why is because an archaeologist can't make much money by themselves. Archaeology doesn't pay. The only way you can make money being an archaeologist is to write a book, and you go to class, you have a class you teach, and you make all the students buy your book, see? And your ideas are in that book. And if somebody comes along and says, oh, no, there was somebody here before Columbus, then he's going to object to that because he doesn't have that in his book, see? So there we're getting resistance from these old-style archaeologists.
All right. It's a little bit of a catch-up. But before I bring up Adrian, and I'm going to speak for him a little bit, and he'd correct me when I bring him up, this looking into Black Indians, looking at the connection to the missing Hebrews, these things are kind of new to us, because we've really dug into, American history, what we do know, keeping names and dates, checking on the conspiracies that have happened. And I'm not saying conspiracy theories, I'm saying conspiracies that actually happened. And really digging through that information, which led me to the bloodlines because of my theology background. And so when I got interested in DNA and quantum physics and things like that, that really led me to that bloodlines theory. And unfortunately, everything I find out actually supports that. But getting into Black Indians, which we knew there were some, but the depth is way huger than we thought, and getting into the Black Hebrews that were here in North America pre-Columbo, pre-colonizing, is new. And so we're kind of bringing you guys along with us as we dig into this stuff. And we may have questions as we go along. So what I'm going to ask is, if you have information, if you know the names of books, if there are creators that you can lead us to, if there are documents online, put it in the comments. If you're on my Patreon, put the link in the Patreon, get us that information, because we really, really, really want to dig into it. So whatever you put into the comments, it will be welcomed and appreciated both by me and by the people in the comments, because this is the best live tribe on YouTube, bar none. Just be nice. And also shout out to the replay gang. That goes for you as well. If you have links for us, that would be fantastic. And finally, Bessie Wu is here. She says that this is her first live, and we're so happy that you're here. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Adrian Hicks.
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Leon is already putting in lots of information. And I will say that Leon is on my Patreon, and he gives me phenomenal links and videos and lots of things to look at. He is great to get research from. He said he's argued with people online about Black Africans coming to America.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of add to what it is that you were talking about, and I don't profess to know what Leon's positions are, but I suspect that they align with mine. When Well, a few things actually. And this is a kind of a big topic of discussion. I'm fairly certain. I believe I was thinking about this all day. I believe that this is probably going to be one of a few conversations at least that we have on this subject, because it's like you're entering a whole new frontier. It's kind of the Wild West. There's a lot of theories about it, but and I'm sure that as we move through this, there'll be more concrete information. But when you're me, if somebody like me, you tend to get told uh, a lot of convenient stories and myths about who you are, where you come from. And it's interesting that the mm, people who are of the dominant society here in America are the ones who get to tell the tale of who I am. And the story is always convenient. It's, well, you really didn't have a history before this. We kind of found you and you were savage. And, look, we brought you along into, into society, yeah, into civilization, is what they say. Before that, you didn't have a civilization or whatever. And you know, the math just doesn't add up. If, if they say, or if we believe in the out of Africa theory, and you're the first people, then how is it you don't have any history? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then also, I remember through college having to take Western civilization classes, and all of those classes were taken from the purview of Europe, and everybody else played a smaller bit part. And again, just doesn't add up, doesn't make any sense. And as you and I have been going through a lot of the history of other groups of people, it just reinforces to me that there's a greater story here that needs to be told. Um, and America in its foundation and America in its discovery can't be as simple as we've been told. The pilgrims showed up and they ate some turkey with some people who were over there in the bushes, and then all of a sudden we got skyscrapers, and next Elon Musk. All right, that's
Right. It
that
was
seems to be
empty except for the
right.
few people that were here, right?
Right,
But then you look
exactly.
at the census and it's like there were 10 million people in North
Hmm.
America.
Hmm.
And that's their number.
Right.
It's the government, the United States government, that says that. And
Yeah.
then it went down to 1.4 million because the cold. Which, how I feel about that theory.
Right.
How come disease only went one way and not the other?
Exactly.
How could everybody on that boat be a carrier of smallpox and nobody died? Like, it just doesn't
Exactly.
make sense.
No.
And, like I've said before, humans in Africa didn't sit around for 380,000 years waiting for a white person to tell them what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
This is 380,000 years. When we look at every continent, just about every continent, Black people, there were original Black people there.
Hmm.
And the reason I say just about is because we don't have the proof that we need from a few of them, but I think you'll find it. That's 380,000 years. People moved about the globe.
Hmm.
Like,
I mean,
and
just think about the last 2,000 years.
yeah,
If you believe this way, then 2,000 years ago that meant that Jesus was around,
right.
right? And you're talking about 380,000 years, and they couldn't just take in a little, fishing expedition across, the
Right. Or like
Atlantic or the
Leon said,
Pacific.
they couldn't build a boat or a
Right.
wheel, you know.
It's like, I got this wood and there's that water, and I can't quite figure out how the
Right.
two go together. Right.
Right. And if you look at at Pangea, right, 380,000 years ago, the continents were closer because
Yeah.
Pangea moves apart.
Didn't we have a conversation about how much closer they were? I'll probably at some point look that up while we're in this
No,
conversation,
it's
just because
fine.
now I'm super
There
curious.
there are some continents that move at like 7 centimeters a year.
Mm,
There are some that move at 1 or 2 centimeters a year. It's really not a ton, but also you think back to the hominids that were found that were 10 million years old.
mm,
Oh, the globe was much different then.
way different. Yeah.
Way different.
Yeah.
Um, but again, in 380,000 years, somebody could figure out how to make a damn boat.
Right.
They were not just waiting around because they didn't know what to do. These are the original Homo sapiens, the ones with the big neocortex of problem solving and critical thinking skills.
Hmm.
They can figure it out. Thank you, Adric. I'm gonna put this up here. Adric is paying $4.99 for the Adrian Hicks tax.
Maybe one of these
So
days I'll
now
get enough information to get like $10 or something like that. Right?
well, I think everybody knows what it's set at today. Apparently, the Adrian Hicks tax is set at $4.99 today. So thank you, Adric. I appreciate you so, so much.
Yeah.
Cutting
Thanks a
Up with
lot,
the
Adrian.
Joneses is here, and also Grab Second Gear. Eddie is here. Os to you as well, Eddie. Okay, I'm sorry I kept interrupting. Please go ahead, Adrian.
No, so I appreciate your kind of caveat at the beginning of this because this is, like I said at the beginning, this is kind of, wide open territory. And, I think there's a reason, why you aren't being told this type of history. And, just in the stuff that we've been able to uncover together, through conversation and or, in these lives, it leads me to ask the question, what else didn't they tell us? What else is out there that we need to go and discover? What else
Right.
did they lie about? You know?
Right. And I think that's what makes it difficult because it's not like you could just simply research this the same way that you would research other things
Mhm.
because it is obfuscated, it is hidden. There is, in that beginning that I showed that was just tons of images, you will see that literal images are whitewashed.
Right.
Like it is so difficult. You have to dig and dig and dig and dig. And that's why, again, I put out to people if you have information to share with us, please share it with us because that's the only way we're going to find as close to the truth as we can. And the reason I say as close as we can is because lots of people were killed off.
Hmm.
Lots of records were completely destroyed. Library of Alexandria was completely destroyed. The Library of Timbuktu completely destroyed. Like the only way that we can get as close to the truth as possible is if we're all sharing it and not shaming each other, pointing fingers at each other, well, how could you think that Queen Elizabeth was a black person? You know what I mean? Like, of
Right.
course, I don't. I know she's from the House of Gotha.
No, she was
But
a
if
sister.
somebody was to say that, I where did that come from?
Right.
Did that come from the fact that when the Moors came to Europe, there were a lot of royal Moors and there were some interminglings and things like that. But then if I shared the information about that she comes from the House of Gotha and that they changed their name so they wouldn't be attached to the Goths of Germany, we can kind of all come together. But at the end of the day, we all have to remember for at the longest, white people have only been here 40,000 years. And so when we look at these ancient stories that white people try to center themselves in, that's just impossible. The Neanderthals, who genetically were white with very light hair, very light eyes, they came about around 40,000 years ago. And the mutated white people, the ones with freckles and whatnot, that's about 6,000 years. So
Mm.
there's been a lot of time where the earth was covered with heavily melanated people, which makes sense because this is a very sunshiny planet.
Yeah. Not much
And
protection.
right, eyes need protection, skin needs
Right.
protection,
Right.
hair needs to be able to ventilate and things like that. And so that it totally makes sense, the people who were made for the earth kind of thing.
Mm.
But, Neanderthals spontaneously came out of an area that was very cold, and they needed to warm their necks. They needed to cover their necks, so they needed long, straight hair. You know, um, they needed to be able to absorb as much vitamin D as possible, and melanin, as much as it's a protection, it will block vitamin D. And so, because they're farther away from the sun, so we can see why that might have happened.
Take your vitamin D3 supplements, black people.
Yes,
That's
please
the message.
do. There's so many studies out there that just about every Black person in the United States is vitamin D deficient.
Mm.
Mm.
Isn't that crazy? Can you imagine a world where you didn't have an Alexandria that had been destroyed, or
Mm.
you have a world where the Tasmanians still exist, past the year 1900, or um, I mean, I think about those types of events as events that lead you back to the Stone Age, right? That's literally
Mhm.
bombing you back to the Stone Age. All of that loss of knowledge. Can we imagine a world where whatever knowledge around Gobekli Tepe was still available to us, and we could have built off of that.
Wow. Like we would find it and be like, "Oh yeah, there it is, that thing that we already knew about."
Right,
Kinda like when they
right.
found Troy, we had that information because it came from the Greeks, so nobody
Right.
destroyed that, and so
Hmm.
then when we found Troy, it was like, "Oh, there it is."
Right.
It would be great if we knew that about Kemet, about Timbuktu, about, Gobekli Tepe, about all these things, but that stuff has to get destroyed. I do wanna say Vincent is in here. Hi, Vincent, thanks for being here. Alright, um, Atrix he's calling the Neanderthals the abominable snowmen.
I don't know that
Possibly
they were
that's
that
where that
tall.
myth comes from.
I don't know that they were that tall. I don't know how abominable they were. Weren't they kind of short?
Um, I don't remember. I do remember that they were being described as big, but,
Mm-hmm.
that's kinda, barrel-chested,
Mm-hmm.
broad-shouldered, the, supraorbital ridge above
Okay.
the what we call the cave what they had the caveman look. That's what we used to call cavemen.
Yeah. I just
Is
I, I just envision them as being kind of broad and stumpy. Maybe that's just me.
maybe, hard to say. Chef Mike
I
said,
mean,
"If we had that information, we would realize that we're not as advanced as we think we are." And yeah, we talked about that last time, how advancement goes in circles. Just as civilizations rise and fall, at our own advancement rises and falls, and then we have those 11, 12,000 year cataclysms that happen where we sort of have to start over again.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do just a quick, summary recap, to finish up. I know I played that video, to get us where we need to be today. So, like I said, Neanderthals evolved in Europe. They're tied to 2 specific Jewish lineages as well, and their range extended from Western Europe, which is the Spain, France, Germany area, through Eastern Europe and into Western and Central Asia, reaching as far as Siberia and the Middle East. So, that Siberia is very important that we remember when we talk about the other Native Americans that were here that are of Siberian ancestry. They actually have a dual ancestry. So, what we generally think of, or what the common American thinks of when we say Native American, is actually somebody with a fusion of East Asian Siberian ancestry via Beringia, which is the Bering Strait, where they came over and they sort of bottlenecked. They lived on the strait, the frozen strait, for about 1,000 years. So they bottlenecked there. And then the other thing they're fused with is ancient West Eurasian Iberian related ancestry via Malta. So this is all genetically proven. So this is why Native Americans share um, DNA affinity with both Siberians and ancient Europeans. Okay. So Iberia was kind of the Neanderthal last refuge, right? And then they all fused together in Siberia, made their way into the American homeland. So the Iberians carried haplogroups like X and the Neanderthal admixture eastward. In Siberia, they fused with the Denisovan and Asian groups, right? This is the archaeological evidence is from a find called Malta Boy. And then from Beringia, their descendants crossed into the Americas, creating the dual genetic foundation of Native Americans. Now, in case you missed it, last time I went over what the difference was between Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous. They are not interchangeable, they mean different things. I am a Native American simply because I was born in America. That's all that Native American means. We've actually tried to make it mean something that it's not, just like somebody born in New York is a native New Yorker,
Hmm.
right? So, um, all known hominid species, with the exception of the Neanderthals, originated in Africa. This is what our DNA evidence has proven thus far. Populations that eventually reached the Americas carried admixture from the Neanderthals via Europe and West Asia, the Denisovans via Siberia and East Asia, and Homo sapiens out of Africa. So by the time the Americas were invaded by colonizers, the people um, crossing already embodied a blend of multiple hominid ancestries. And that was something that I think was shocking to me, is that when I get into these very old writings of people with firsthand accounts describing these people, we hear about white indigenous tribes as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
They were very rare. I think we've heard of two. Um, they would be very rare. But if we really think about it, boundaries were much different then. And the Inuit, being in Canada, Alaska area, they look very Siberian because they didn't come down into southern North America and mix with anyone. So they still look very Siberian, but also very pale.
Right.
So it's not a far stretch to say. Now, one of the tribes we did hear about, the way they were described, they were probably actually albino and not white because they had vision. They were as white as the moon, I think they said, and like they had vision problems. They could only come out at night because the sun was too bright. So that sounds like there's literally no eye protection.
Mm.
Um, but we did hear of that. But as we dig, we're hearing a lot about Black tribes. So it wasn't just Siberian. In fact, it may have been that the majority of the tribes were actually Black. Bessie
Did
says, if you want links, I have watched Kurimayo Ahau, who covers old literature about dark skinned people in the Americas before the slave trade.
Mhm.
Bessie, if you won't be able to put the links in the chat, but if you go over to my Patreon, I have a free membership option. If you just subscribe as a member, you can leave links in there, and then we can all have access to it. So that would be great.
Say again who it was that had the vision problems.
It was the moon-eyed people. They were described as the moon-eyed people, and I think it was the Cherokees that wiped them out, and we actually only know about them from the Cherokees, from their legends,
Okay.
and they described these people as white as the moon, and that they could only come out at night because they couldn't see. And so it's highly likely that these people were not actually white as what we would consider,
Right.
even though that's made up. We all know that, but they weren't one of the white races of people, I guess, even though white's not a race. I don't know. I'm
Right.
going to quit trying to skip over my words, but they were probably more than likely actually albino people. But the Cherokees killed them all.
I envision this continent of the Americas, not just the United States, because we tend to think of the United States as the whole of America. It's not, but because this continent spans the distance to from the Arctic Circle, almost to Antarctica, if you count Brazil, areas like that, you could have a landmass that had a very diverse population of people. If we think about Africa, nearly the whole of Africa is situated kind of around the equator. It doesn't come up north much, much past that. So it stands to reason that the people there would be darker.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas here in North America, you could end up with, very fair complected people as you go into Canada. You talk about the Inuit, and you talk about how they look more Siberian.
Hmm.
That would completely make sense, and when you talk about white indigenous people, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, that's completely possible. It's like everybody talks about Columbus, but nobody talks about Leif Erikson.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Well,
strange?
even before Leif Erikson, I think I've talked about this in another show, that there are records that um, people of Druid ancestry were
Hmm.
coming to North America in the year 700.
Hmm.
And so when that happened, there were some Druid Proto-Celtic people who married into tribes. They
Hmm.
didn't try to take over, colonize, whatever. They opened up trade routes. If they wanted to stay, they assimilated into these tribes. They didn't try to take over. And then we have, I think in the year 1000, Leif Erikson was here. So there was a lot of trade going on across all the continents.
Hmm.
And North America didn't get to be the exception to the rule, just like there were black people on every continent, but North America doesn't get to be the exception to that.
We were having a conversation about. I had just. I have some dear friends of mine who are Filipino,
Hmm.
and I was sharing a meal with them. They had made some adobo, which is amazing. Um, but anyway, enough about me being fat and eating a lot. Um, we were having a conversation, and they are your uh, when I say Filipino, they are the Filipino that immediately comes to your mind, right? The one that we're um, uh, most associated with. But I was asking my friend's mother, you know, how much interaction or influence do the Negritos have on the mainstream Filipino culture? And she said, very little. And she says, "Oh, you're talking about the Negritos of the mountains, all right?" And that's almost how I was going to describe them, the Negrito people of the mountains. So these are very old, a very old group of people. Probably what we would consider indigenous. Group of people, maybe the first people who were there,
Hmm.
right?
That's what
Um,
I was just getting ready to explain that to people. Indigenous means first people on virgin soil.
who are in the mountains, and even mainstream Filipinos themselves are saying they don't have really much interaction with this group of people still today. In fact, she says that they have a kind of a folk song that says Negritos, what kind of food do you eat? And that song might sound kind of silly to the rest of us. I don't know, but what it says to me is you're so different than I am. You're so mysterious to me that I don't even know what you eat.
Right.
That's how much they don't interact with each other. So, and then, again, I talked about the Tasmanians, which, are over there, right off of Australia. You and I spoke about the East Timor people of Indonesia. Uh,
Hmm.
you have all of this stuff, the Sentinelese people over by India. And just when it comes to America, no,
Right.
you know,
Right.
so,
They were just waiting for white people.
yeah, yeah,
Too bad Hitler didn't discover North America first.
yeah,
That would have been his dream because apparently it was an all Aryan continent.
right.
Okay, so Native Americans went through the bottleneck. I talked about that. That reduced their genetic variation. Okay. But there were, however, others in North America, even possibly earlier than um, those Native Americans started coming across the Bering Strait. So they're what we would call the Black Indians. These are African looking peoples in the Americas. And I don't say African descended because it sounds like they just got there. So if
Hmm.
we're looking at out of Africa, okay, I'm African descended too then. You know what I
Right,
mean? That's why
right.
when we're talking about Black Indians, these are indigenous people. They were the first on virgin soil. Okay. You're not going to have people who look like the Inuit come and live in California, Florida, Louisiana. It's very sunny, it's very hot. That's not where they're going to be. Hey, let's go all the way down to the end of the continent, right? But people who thousands and thousands of years ago traveled by boat out of Africa and hit Central and South America, they may migrate up into the southern end of North America, which is what we understand to have happened.
Can I just for the sake of conversation push back just a little bit on that? California
Sure.
is a large place, so Southern California, I'd agree. But you have Northern California, and the climate's a little different up there.
Hmm.
Especially start getting over towards Portland, Washington State, et cetera. So, and then, of course, you're not far away from Canada at that point. So you might have some,
Hmm.
you know, and I think the fair thing, at least from my standpoint, to say about all of this in totality is that, you know, perhaps, African, what we would consider um, uh, traditionally African looking people, darker people, were also here too, right? You
Hmm.
can't just be all over the world and not be in this one place. So I
Right.
just think that everybody was kind of here. To your point, earlier
Yeah.
talking about even you had some white
Right.
indigenous people here.
But the reason I said possibly earlier is because if we look at that, the Clovis first theory that everybody who was here, all Native Americans came across the Bering Strait. That's the Clovis first theory.
Mm-hmm.
Then unfortunately they found older skulls in the southern part of North America, right where these black tribes were, right?
Right.
Like we have Queen Khalifa of California, we have all these other tribes that are all across the southern part of North America. Why did slavery take off in the South?
Yeah.
Is it possible because all of these tribes already lived there, already knew
Already
what
there.
grew
Yeah.
there, and was already growing, tobacco, sugar, those things? The plantations were already here and they got taken over. I don't know. I'm kind of going off on a
No,
tangent, but
I was chuckling a little bit because my dumb brain, just imagines a situation where folks come over on the land bridge and they're celebrating being first, and then they happen to look over in the distance and they see brothers barbecuing and playing basketball already.
yes,
So anyway, so
just waving at them. Hey,
hey, you bring the potato salad, no raisins,
right.
you know. So,
No, we brought salmon from the north.
right. We'll barbecue that too. Let's go.
Right, exactly. Throw it on the grill. Okay, so early descriptions of indigenous people here, European colonists recorded tribes that looked what they called Negro-like or black in phenotype, despite being classified as Indians. They classified them as Indians. The Nipmuc, Lumbee, Black Seminoles, Washita, and Yamasee, just as some examples, were later reclassified. So they were originally classified as Indian, and we'll get more into that. And then they were reclassified as Negro, colored, or mulatto in census rolls, despite their own claims of being indigenous. And this reclassification often erased their identity as Native peoples. And so I just want to kind of bring it back to the show I did. This is funny, but about the ancient Britonics, because these were Black people, right? But during that show, I talked about how my ancestor, the first person that was here in North America in my lineage, was sentenced to this British colony in North America
Mhm.
in 1590.
Yep.
The sentence was just that they viewed North America as the wild, wild west. You know what I mean?
Yep.
As
Australia.
just yes. And so um, when he came, he just, he goes into town from the port they dropped him off on, and he just stayed there. He stayed in that town. And in the writings and what we have from Britain themselves, um, this town was full of what they called Indians, mulattoes, and the Welsh, because it was the Welsh that were being sentenced to this area. And so um, my ancestor in his documentation said that he married a free Indian woman. In census records, she was labeled as Negro.
Mm,
And so it's, you know, um, there were people this is 1590, this is pre-1619, you know what I mean? Like, there
mm,
were people here of a variety of complexions that the British wanna play dumb about, and
mhm.
this is something I bring up to people too when they're like, "Well, they didn't know what they were looking at." That's BS. You tell me the Spanish colonists who came over here didn't know what a Moor actually looked like?
Yeah, they just got through kicking out the Muslims in 1493.
Right. Like, they know exactly what a Moor
Right,
is.
right.
These people have been into Africa before they ever came to North America. They know
And
what black means, they know what negro means, they know what mulatto means, they know
mhm,
what they know the people that they're sending on these expeditions are their best and brightest.
right.
These are not
Well,
uneducated
not
idiot
Columbus, but
okay.
he wasn't so,
He
you don't
that was
shouldn't say that.
nepotism. But, the
Mm.
cartographers, the
Mhm.
ethnographers, these are very studied, educated people who were sent to study what was found. These
Maggie,
aren't
they had Moors on the boats.
they
They
had
were the
Moors
people
on the boat.
navigating here.
Right. So then
The
they're
the,
like,
the Moors had
well,
been there in the Iberian Peninsula for 800 years.
right. And so when people are like, "Well, they just labeled them Moors because they didn't know. They just labeled all black people Moors." No, they did not. First of all, no, they didn't. And secondly, you cannot tell me that Spanish people did not know what a Moor was.
That'd be like an American coming and knocking, or a white American coming and knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, we just discovered you were black." I mean, it would be
Right,
ridiculous.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, only been here since 1619 or whatever, or before. So,
right.
oh, and my official designation according to the Seminoles is freedman.
Mhm.
That's what I am. And a lot of these conversations are making me kind of want to dig more into that on my
Yeah,
own behalf.
into your personal information. The interesting thing is the town where and this is just a side note, but to think about, the town where the Welshmen were, relegated, sentenced to, and that they set up this town. Of course, this is multi-ethnic people, and as Britain is getting more involved in their colony, they start saying anybody who's mulatto has to be indentured. And
Mm,
so, since all these families were made up of multi ethnicities, all they just did was traded each other's children to be indentured, right? Like, instead of my kids working my land with me today, they're going to go work with Sally Jane, and then Sally Jane's kids are going to come over here and work for my husband because he's white,
mm.
so,
Pretty
and,
slick way to keep your family intact.
right, and that was what they did, and, when Britain caught on to what was going on and it was getting closer to, 1619 when they really wanted to start digging into this colony and, making money, they, tried to gather up the black people of the town. They chased a lot of people out, and then they took over the town and named it Jamestown.
Hmm. Was the origin of Jamestown? I'd never heard that story before.
Same exact area, but they, that there's already houses and whatnot there. It's easy enough.
Right.
You just shoo people off the land, and then you can build it up and do whatever you want. So, um, okay, so we talked about reclassification. Transatlantic contact, we talked about that a little bit. Some researchers argue that Africans reached the Americas before Columbus via the Saharan currents. And we look at the boats that were used in Africa along the coast, and they could definitely make it. And there are stories in Africa of them definitely making it. The presence of what they call negroidal skeletal remains from 11,000 years ago in Brazil is African. And that kind of goes in with the pre-Beringian migration. And then certain lineages found among native groups show ties to Africa, not just Iberia and Siberia. And it's those middle ones. You have very dark people on the southern edges of North America. You have the Inuit who are at the very top, and you have the sort of Siberian, Iberian people in the middle, and some mixed, and others enslaved. The Cherokee who killed the Moon-Eyed people also enslaved Black people. So, not everybody was singing Kumbaya. Black Indians represent indigenous groups not descended from the Beringian founders. And, we can figure out why history erases them, right? Because as I have said many times, it's what has happened to Black Americans from the beginning, from 1619 and before, sounds like what people do with prisoners of war. It sounds like a biblical playbook of war and conquest. There's so many illogical things in the stories that were told. So European settlers would benefit from Black people continuing to believe that all of them were brought over from another country and they have no history and they have no name and they have no culture, when maybe we're just actually sitting on their land.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into it, but I want to give you a list of tribes that were relabeled from Indian to Black, colored, or mulatto in the records centuries before they would have intermarried with freedmen. Okay. Montaukett, Shinnecock, Narragansett, Mashpee, Nanakoke, Lenape, Ramapow, Powhatan, Catawba, Tuscarora, Nipmuc, Lumbee, Nottoway, and Puspatuk. Now, these are just the ones that we know about. All of those tribes in records were labeled Indian. Prior to marrying freedmen, I want people to really hear this. They were changed to Black, colored, or mulatto. They didn't change. The records changed.
Well, I'm sure that Leon and Adric would probably agree. But, all throughout time immemorial, the only tribe that we ever heard of in Black families was Cherokee, because somebody had good hair.
And then you find out the Cherokee are the ones who are, killing the Moon-Eyed people and enslaving Black people.
In fact, for Leon and Adric, put a 1 in the chat if what I'm saying is correct.
I think Spain Man's in here too.
Okay, yeah, put a 1 in the chat if that's what you heard growing up. Oh, my people is Cherokee.
Definitely. Okay, so excuse me, I'm sorry. I want to show people my new book. This book. Oh, Spain. Leon put a 1 in, and Spain Man says Choctaw, is what his family said.
Yeah, my children are Choctaw. They get newsletters in the whole nine. So that definitely did happen. It had just like even God bless her, my grandmother says all the time, oh we got Cherokee in our family. I've never been able to find them, but that's okay.
It may have become like how people call different sodas. They just call them Coke.
Right.
Maybe like that. Like
the Cherokee is the generic word for
indigenous ancestry. Right. But we're Cherokee.
Right.
What it gets shortened to.
Yeah.
Compassionate's in here too. Nice to have you in here, Compassionate. Chef Mike is also in here. Yeah, and he says his family is Cherokee. Yeah,
cool.
It's very cool. Okay, so this book that I just got is It's called Researches Philosophical and Antiquarian Concerning the Aboriginal History of America. Now, this book is amazing. Now, first of all, you can see the cover. That's not an original cover, but the whole thing is just a photocopy. So this isn't them retyping it, and then we can't trust, what they say. It's just a photocopy of the book. What's interesting about it is that this person, McCulloch, he gathered up all of the letters and papers and information, everything that Spain and Britain and, everybody had written about any Aboriginal person that was in North America. And this is almost like his research paper. He gathered all these resources, and then he went himself to figure it out. So this, he published this in 1829. He worked on this for many, many years. And there's a lot of really, really good information in here. And probably on our Wednesdays, we're going to be going through this book at some point. Adrian says his people were from Eastern Long Island. I was getting ready to say, is that the Nipmuc or the Shinnecock? And he's the Shinnecock and the Montauk.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just think it's really good that all of this history is starting to come out, and we're getting interested in it. Again, the stories, they don't all match up.
They really don't.
Yeah.
And so many people know their like tribal history. So many Black people know their tribal history, but then they were told, well, those people mixed with the Africans that had been enslaved. And so your tribal designation is diluted with your African blood. And I'm not saying that Africans were not trafficked here and that they didn't mix with people who were enslaved. I'm not saying that at all. But when we find out that those tribes were actually looked African, they were Black already.
Mm-hmm. And no one questions it in the other direction. Because when I get those newsletters from the Choctaw Nation,
they're white.
Yes, very much so. But no one would ever question, their native heritage. Oh yeah, well that makes sense.
Yeah,
But when it comes the other way around, it's different.
I was researching today, which I can pull it up if people want the details, but I was looking today at the Cherokee who did own enslaved people.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is there was a few Cherokee who, not a ton, but a few who did own plantations and owned people. The interesting thing is the two most popular Cherokee people who owned plantation and owned enslaved people, one of them was 1/8 Cherokee, and the other 7/8 was from Scotland.
So he's Scottish.
So he's Scottish, right? And
exactly.
So again, when we hear these stories, like, well, the Cherokees owned slaves. Well, which ones?
Right.
This was pre $5 Indians, but these were people who were claiming their quote unquote Native American ancestry to get land.
Right.
So this guy's 1/8 Cherokee, like from his great grandma. And so he claims this, he gets the land, he puts on a plantation, he owns enslaved people, right? And he's white.
Right. Like Lily, probably.
Lily, right. I think his last name was Ross. That's what led me to it, because his last name was Ross, this famous Cherokee person who owned a plantation. I was like, wait, Ross? Ross is his last name?
Right.
I'm like, what's his ancestry? So, yeah.
In the chat, I just asked Kareem Austin, what the name of the book was that he was talking about. He's mentioning that in 1920, the Smithsonian wrote a book talking about the reclassification of natives.
That would be great. And hi, Kareem. Thank you for being here. Leon says, then the annoying Irish topic and being accepted is annoying. So clearly.
Yes.
Yeah, there were a lot of Irish who sold out. after the uprisings, where the Irish were working with Black people on these uprisings, and then they got offered whiteness. There's a lot of them that sold out.
Yeah. Can I mention something, real quick? It seems like there's a lot of argument online. Some folks are overcorrecting, in my opinion anyway, overcorrecting so viciously to where they're saying that the whole of America was Black and only Africans, were here, right? And, I guess my position in it is that no, we were a part of this global story.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And, not perhaps, but definitely our history isn't just slavery, being free, and then Jim Crow, and all this. We have a, a a huge history, and it's a beautiful story,
Mm-hmm.
But we were a part of this story as well here, in North America.
Right. I totally agree. So I'm going to read a couple things from this book because I think people would find it interesting. Because at first he's talking about the physical appearance, and that's what we're talking about today is the physical appearance. So that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So he says, we propose in this chapter to lay before the reader some account of the physical characters of the Aborigines of America, such as they appeared to the first discoverers of the continent, not only in their really natural conformation, but also in those peculiarities of appearance, which from perverted ideas of beauty, they either inflicted on their bodies or forced them to assume while the system was in a growing state and susceptible of such vicious impressions. Now, what he's talking about is later he gets into piercings, tattoos, things that most native people of any type and continent do, things like body modifications,
Right. Right.
Okay, so he says, in the physiognomy engravings of different nations, giving in physiological works, which seems to strike the eye with the appearance of great differences, it is really the headdress and clothing that enables us to recognize the nations whom they are intended to represent. So he's talking about when you go to different areas. Now, this first region he's talking about is all across the South. That is the route of... because the first person he was talking about was Ferdinand de Soto and his writings. So that would have been in, I don't have the year, but Ferdinand de Soto went all across the South.
Southern, yeah.
Yeah. In, I think early 1500s, I think is when
I'll find out.
Okay.
Find out for us.
Okay. So, he's originally talking about you can tell them apart by their headdress, right? So then he says, though America possesses some dark brown men appearing as Black, yet it has been almost universally believed that there were no Aboriginal Blacks or Negroes found on this continent. But from considering the peculiar circumstances under which a Black race was found in North America, I find it more than probable that the common opinion is erroneous. Now, this is in 1829. So he's saying everybody's trying to say there were no indigenous Black people. And he's like, well, since we found Black people, that's wrong.
Right.
So,
like, yes, there were. Here he is, right here. His name
right. He's right here. Right.
You're talking about the 1539 to 42 was the expedition through the South for Fernando de Soto.
Okay, so before 1619.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then he says, Torquemada says, the Californians showed no manner of surprise at the sight of some Negroes that accompanied Vizcaino on a voyage to this coast in 1602. As I have never seen Torquemada's long Spanish words, who says from Torquemada that when a Negro was ordered to distribute some biscuits to the Californians at the Bay of St. Barnabas.
Why is it always biscuits? It's always biscuits.
Well,
Can we
for
do
them,
something
that would
other than
mean
biscuits? I
cookies.
mean, you know
That
what I'm
would mean
saying?
cookies for them. The natives seemed greatly pleased at the sight of the Negro and signified to him that they lived in friendship and correspondent with a people of his color, and
Wow.
that not far from there was a Negro village. And we've
Wow.
heard of the Califians and the Californians many times,
Right.
who were
And
a black.
you said this is 1602?
Yeah.
Okay. So and you're saying this is on the West Coast, right?
Hmm. This is in
Well,
California.
right. So that, I mean, again, obviously well before 1619. And if we're talking about 1619 as kind of a jumping off point, all we had was the 13 colonies at that point. We weren't even west of the Mississippi. So,
Right.
so this
And even
is
in
a couple hundred
1619,
years.
the very first ship had 20 enslaved people on it in 1619.
Right. Yeah, this
So
is
how are we finding whole villages of black people?
right. When was the westward expansion? Wasn't that in the 1800s? I mean, so aren't we talking a couple hundred years before the westward expansion beyond the Mississippi?
Yeah, it was in the 1800s. I don't
Yeah,
know when,
yeah.
because I'm not good at place year
Place and date, right? I
history.
know. Sorry. Well, I'm
Kareem
just saying
says,
that this was a couple hundred years before folks started dysentery and dying. You know, shout out to Oregon Trail.
yeah. Kareem says, if he's not mistaken, he believes the book is called The History of the Southeast Indians of North America.
Thank you very much for that. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely want to look at these things. He said it's at home, so he's trying to remember off the top of his head.
Well, I'm gonna start looking for that book right now.
Okay. So he goes on to say the color of the Indians of the California missions seen by La Perouse, and he gives voyage documents as a reference right here.
Wow.
Quote, very nearly approaches that of Negroes whose hair is not woolly. And in another place, the color of these Indians is that of Negroes. So Langsdorff, who visited St. Francisco on the coast of California, confirms the observations of La Perouse. For he says, again, references, the Indians were a very dark complexion, approaching to black, and they have large projecting lips and broad, flat Negro noses. Indeed, many of their features, as well as their physiognomy and almost their color, bear a strong resemblance to the Negroes. Their hair, however, can be long and straight. So if we think about, and he said some of them have straight hair, some of them have what they would call Negro hair, right?
Mm,
We think about when they're so dark, and they have all of these African features, but they're not quite dark enough. Think about they're comparing the people that they're seeing to the people that they've seen in Africa, who
right.
were more than likely much darker.
Right.
Their skin probably was much darker. And so this is why they're like, they look exactly like black people, except they're a little touch lighter.
They're the same, but they're different. No, I'm
Right.
joking.
It's just a little lighter. Then he says, and we cannot admit for a moment that these American blacks were ever driven by stress of weather across the Pacific Ocean to California unless it be proved that they are the descendants of Negroes left by the Spaniards. It will follow of necessity that they have been settled in America from the earliest ages. See, this is where he's fighting against that, because they were already trying to sell us that any black people that were found in North America were black people who had either been set free or had escaped from the original Spaniards in 1492. And what he's fighting against here is like, um, y'all don't want to admit that they could have crossed these oceans, right? And because we're finding all of these black people here, they were indigenous. He says have been settled in America from the earliest age. And that's that whole indigenous on the land, on virgin land, right? The very
Right.
first humans to put foot on that land. Then he says, in another part of America, if reliance can be placed upon the correctness of the relation, a race of blacks were seen at so early a period of our history that it seems impossible to avoid the conclusion that they were aboriginal. He gives a bunch of references there in describing the journey of Balboa. Now we've heard of him across the Isthmus of Darien in AD 1511. 1511,
Wow.
right? So if we're talking, they're trying to say that any black people were escaped from the Spaniards and they built all these villages. They could not have done that from 1492 to 1511. Okay.
I
So
mean,
this,
we're kind of fast,
I get it, not that fast. So 1511, Balboa gives us history. There is a region not above 2 days' journey from Caraquin in which they found only blackamoors. Now, I'm telling you right now, this is one of those things where you can't tell me that the Spanish person did not know exactly what a Moor was.
Hmm.
He knows what he's looking at when he's looking at it.
Hmm.
Okay. And he didn't
Absolutely.
say possibly, maybe, could be, looked like, resembled. He said, we found only blackamoors and those exceedingly fierce and cruel. So these are a warrior class of blackamoors, right? The circumstance of finding them there, he attempted to explain by the conjecture that they were Ethiopians who had crossed the Atlantic. This is
Mm,
what he said in 15, this is Balboa saying
right.
this in 1511. They were Ethiopians who had, now he knew what Ethiopians were too. He had
Hmm.
met Ethiopians many times,
Well,
right?
again, these guys were actively trying to, and had by this point, actively trying to expel black people from the Iberian Peninsula for
Mhm.
years.
And he's not
Probably
saying this.
hundreds of years.
Right, and he's not saying this to be nice, and I'll prove that, right? Because he says they're Ethiopians who crossed the Atlantic to rob the country,
Wow.
and that after having been shipwrecked, they had been compelled by the natives to take refuge in the mountains. So he's like, yeah, these people, they were here. All we can find is these blackamoors, and but they probably came here to rob the joint, right? So
Hmm.
he's no fan, but he's, this is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the author says all that is pure guesswork, which will not attempt to disprove, for it is not more plausible than the supposition that they were actually Aboriginal. So he's saying there's no way Balboa would know how and when they got there.
Right.
Okay. Um, Juarez,
Again, I do want to. I know I keep on going back to
you're
the fact
fine.
that Spain had the newly unified Spain as of 1492 after Grenada fell. They had been trying and trying to expel the Moors, expel the black ruling class out of the Iberian Peninsula for a long time. Which again, I'm not saying I don't approve of it, obviously, but it gives you some idea as to why the Limpieza de Sangre was written the way that it was, or the papal bulls, like the Dum Diversus, you
Mhm.
know, why they were written that way. So, this would have been the attitudes of people like Balboa, that they were raised on. Like these people are no good, you know what I mean? Because they had been trying to expel them out, the Goths, right? They had been trying to expel them and end that 800-year reign of the Iberian Peninsula.
Mhm. I'm smiling, Adrian, because Vincent just put in the chat Schadenfreude.
Oh,
We just had that
just talked about
conversation.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm probably gonna do a short on it, but, for those of you that don't know, Schadenfreude is getting pleasure out of someone else's misery.
Absolutely.
That's what Schadenfreude means. And Vincent, I don't really believe in coincidence, so the synchronicity is very interesting because we literally just had this conversation about Schadenfreude.
Hmm.
So very
And
cool.
about who gets into it and who doesn't, which
Right.
I'll look forward to that short from you, Maggie, on
Yeah.
that. Just another little tidbit. Yeah, I'm sending this out to Kareem. There's a few books. on Amazon right now that kind of sort of dance around the title that you had mentioned. If you would be so kind as to, even after the after this live, go in to Maggie's Patreon and like share that information, as far as what the actual name of that book is when you come upon it. This evening. I think you mentioned that you're at work.
Yeah. If
If you
you're not
could,
able
that'd be
to get
great.
in the Patreon, you can put it in the comments. There's the
Sure.
name of the book.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
great.
I just know that for whatever reason, people can't post links on YouTube,
Hmm.
but you definitely can on Patreon, no matter if you're a paid member or not. And it really makes me know, never mind if people are paid or not.
Mods can post links
Yes.
on YouTube, but for whatever reason they just relegate it to just mods and the channel owner. So
Yeah. Okay. I just want to read a couple more things out of the book. Juarez, in his history of Guatemala, in describing the complexion of the people of that province, which almost terminates in the country visited by Balboa, right? So he's saying Guatemala terminates in California. This is how he's describing these areas.
wow, that's a pretty big
Because,
Guatemala.
yeah, because he says in describing the complexion of the people of that province, which almost terminates in the country visited by Balboa. And we were just talking about Balboa, talking about the Californians.
Hmm.
They says expressly that some of the Indians there are white, others black, and others red, others copper color, and seemingly considers them all original nations by his enumeration.
Wow.
So in that area, there were multicolored, this multifaceted people in that area that he said were all original. So there's another circumstance connected with the history of Blacks in this part of the world, which it may be proper to introduce in this place, be it worth what it may, he says. The people of Hispaniola informed Columbus, then he has a long list of references, right? That there was to be the south and southeast a black people who pointed the heads of their javelins with metal. Now we've heard of this, right?
Mm.
That when he went to the islands outside of North America, that Columbus was like, "Hey, how come your spears are gold tipped?" Right? And then what did those natives call those gold tips on their spear? Ghana.
Yeah, because that was a particularly
Gold.
African practice.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
And they had gotten them by trade.
Hmm.
So there had been so much interaction that trade routes were already set up. Everybody was good. It was going back and forth. There was no problems.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
big party, and the white folks just showed up later, like, oh, he finally got here. That's cool.
right. We are the Goths and we're taking over.
Right.
Um, and then you also find corn, maize, that's
Hmm.
indigenous to South America. Where do we find that? In Africa.
Africa. Hmm.
Trade, but we find copper and gold where? In South America, where it
Hmm.
didn't come from. Lots of it, right? Lots of trade. The American Indians, compared with Europeans, have but little beard, and it is almost universally their practice to eradicate it, as well as all other hair from their bodies. Some even plucked out their eyebrows and eyelashes, as were pretty common in the case with the natives of Brazil and Paraguay.
Okay,
The
that's just
paucity of
spooky.
build, I'm sorry, what?
So that's just spooky, plucking out your
The
eyelashes. Mm-mm.
yeah,
I don't trust anyone with no eyelashes. I'm sorry.
right. The paucity of beard is not peculiar to these Americans. The Tartar
Mm, Tartaria.
and Malay
Hmm.
tribes are equally deficient, as well as the African race. So, what they're saying is that, patchy, not as long, the long, thin beards.
Hmm.
Um, it's so common with the African race, the Tartars and the Malays. It's so well understood that it's unnecessary to notice it any further, is what he says. that
Okay.
these Black Indians were grooming their facial hair in the same way across these different cultures, and they're so similar we just don't even need to talk about it.
So the brothers were heading over to the barber shop even back then.
Yep.
Okay.
That long ago, right?
Right.
They were grooming. So yeah, Saul of Tarsus. Vincent says, yeah. Leon says they cannot post links because they are not me, the mod. Okay, so I think we've made a pretty decent case that there were definitely Black people and Black tribes in North America pre-colonizers, and it is highly likely that they were indigenous, especially to California and along the southern coast. Hopefully you guys agree. I think we've made a pretty decent case. Now, interestingly enough, the title of this live is not was there Black Indians in North America?
Right.
It is
Yeah.
the missing Hebrews.
I was going to say,
Right?
which leads us to who were these people?
Right. So I've already talked about before, and if people want me to get into it again, I can, but during the transatlantic slave trade, enslavers targeted tribes with Mosaic customs, meaning they followed the laws of Moses, meaning they were Hebrew, right? And we know this from ship manifests, from their records. We know even their, what you would call invoices. We know this. This is who they targeted. They targeted the people who followed the Mosaic customs, meaning they had Israelite descent or were Hebrews. So that's who was being targeted in Africa when the transatlantic slave trade was going. Now, that didn't start in 1619. That started in the was 1700s or right at 1800 that they started bringing over people from Africa.
Oh, uh, well, I mean, they started bringing over people from Africa. I mean, well, I guess I need to understand your question because, we're talking about 1619, they were bringing over folks. Now, what happened in 1809 is that they abolished the importation of slaves into North America, and that's when the breeding started.
Okay.
So let me understand your question.
So you might look that up, but it's, if I remember correctly, the transatlantic slave trade, as in them moving people from Africa to the Caribbean, to North America, to these different places, but specifically to North America, only went on for like 65 years. It wasn't the whole time from 1619 to 1809. Now,
Okay.
the first ship came in 1619, that's 20 people. The people who were colonizing were bringing their enslaved people, but the mass movement or the mass trafficking of humans, the transatlantic slave trade, was not consistent the whole time. Like, they didn't immediately in 1619 have the ships that would carry, 1 or 200 people from Africa to North America.
Let's see. Everything, what I'm saying, still says, the 1500s to the 1800s when it was, more formally abolished. And I
Okay.
think that comports with, our last, conversation, talking about the Sephardic Jews who, went on into Brazil and started
Yeah.
establishing plantations at that time. And also the same group being uh, agents with outposts in Africa to be able to get, some of that stock, as well to do that slave trade.
I will It's one of those things that, when you've
We just need to
heard
put an
something.
asterisk by it, probably,
Yeah.
and then look into it a little bit further.
Yeah. At some point I will try to find what I was reading about that. Because essentially they brought 300,000 enslaved Africans to North America.
Yeah,
Um, to
the
this
reports are kind of all
continent.
over the place. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'd heard about 400,000 somewhere in there, but I think that jives. And folks in the chat and in the live tribe and in the replay gang, even this difference in information between Maggie and I really points to the fact that there's so much that we don't know because it's all covered over, and that's why these conversations need to be had. There's enough discrepancy, even between the two of us because of the differences in the stories that are out there,
right.
and the fact that we haven't been told, the whole truth about this history, this very important history,
Right.
of North America.
And that's why I said in the beginning, this is new to us. We are discovering this all together,
Hmm.
and trying to put it all together.
And I'm glad that you said that because everybody, not only the two of us, but everybody inside of the chat, can all be a part of this grand discovery. The
Right.
together portion of it isn't just Maggie and I having these conversations. It's kind of like a potluck dinner. I'm bringing this. What are you bringing? And then we can all have a grand discussion.
Yeah.
Like the book that Kareem is talking about. I think that's an important piece, of the puzzle that we can all take a look at together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, so sorry, I wanted to put that question in there. Try to find it. The fusion in the Americas of two streams of people is the population that was enslaved. So the native black tribes, because they were relabeled black so that they could be enslaved both by religion and government, because religion and government said only black people could be enslaved. So you could have, boom, tons of slaves real fast if you look at the black Indians and relabel them um, as not Indian.
Mhm.
So we have the native black tribes and then the African Hebrews um, being rounded up and brought to North America. And then everybody was labeled like a monolith, right? These are Negro people. Like, it doesn't matter
Where they came
that,
from, right?
right? Just because we want to enslave all of you, we're calling you one thing, right?
Hmm.
So this um, reconstituted kind of a Hebrew nation, right, under oppression, which also fulfilled prophecy if we go that far. But to me, it explains why African Americans preserve so much soul in who they are, or spirituality, if we want to call it spirituality, is because you're looking at indigenous people who had indigenous practices mixed with Hebrew people, Israelite people, and all of this is forged under oppression,
Mm.
right? And not that I'm saying oppression is a good thing. I'm just saying
No.
I think it speaks to that. So one of the videos that I wanted to show, when, and just in case anybody thinks that there isn't and never has been oppression or anti-black racism in America, I want to show this that cartoon video real quick. You know which one I'm talking about, where it compares the United States portrayal of black people and then Russia's portrayal of black people, both of them in cartoon form.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that real quick.
All right.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, can we talk about how toxic the cartoons I watched when I was a kid?
Right. I mean, and
Or-
you and I have talked about this before, like the mammy trope and
hmm
so many of the ways that Black people were depicted. And you know what's interesting is that first one, this is how they're depicting Black people, right? But don't they seem very Native American? Even
Right.
in what they're doing, the hoots and the drumming and the sounds and the
I just want to know where he got the polka dot draws from. That's
right. I want to know how he can play a drum with his butt.
you know, and and you know that also talks to another tangential uh, point, which is how important certain types of representation are. You know, perhaps to the development of kids. You know, um, like I remember being a kid and actually seeing that cartoon. You know, I don't want to date myself too much, but you know, I remember being a kid and seeing that cartoon, Lazy Town cartoon. Um, I think that was, can't remember if that was uh, one that came out of the Tom and Jerry camp or whether or not that was Looney Tunes. But you know, just all these super tropey negative portrayals of Black people, you know, in media, and we know that the opposite of that is very effective as well, because you know all the different lies that we were told about, you know, Washington chopping down the cherry tree and Lincoln loving, you know, Black folks so much that he wanted to free the slaves, you know, all of that indoctrination. I mean, I have to deal with 50-plus-year-old, you know, individuals now who believe that stuff was that they were those lies that they were told was the truth. So imagine the detrimental effect of seeing yourself in these savages, you know, who just you know beat drums and slap their butts all day. You know
Hmm.
how that affects the minds of children coming up.
Right. Or that Washington had wooden teeth.
Right, not slave teeth, but wooden teeth. Right.
Right. Kareem says the book is called The Indians of the Southeastern United States by John Swatton. Swaton. I put it up in case anybody else wants to look into this book.
Okay.
Um, he also said the Smithsonian Institution Bureau of American Ethnology Bulletin 137. So that would be another thing to look into that we can definitely check out.
Okay.
So when we're talking about Black Hebrews in the United States, um, it's not just the people who were enslaved and brought from Africa, even though they were specifically targeting Hebrew Black people or Hebrew Africans, right? And this is why you get those dumb stories about, well, Black people sold Black people because
Right.
they immediately got made a monolith. um, there were specific reasons for that. So when we talk about early explorer and missionary accounts, James Adair, um, I, you guys should always look into James Adair. Um, Now, while he is a white guy, he lived with these tribes for years and years and years to study their customs. So, for those, because we will have people say, well, James Adair didn't know what he was confused when he thought that he saw Hebrew practices among the natives. So again, we like to pretend people are stupid. He knew Jewish practices. To my knowledge, he was Jewish and he lived with these tribes for years. He's not making stuff up. He knows what he's looking at. Okay. Oh, Kareem says that book is 900 pages.
Yeah,
Whew.
and I can't seem to find anything from John Swatton on Amazon, for example. I'm kind of looking in real time. For James Adair, there's 5 books available right now. 4 of them are under $40. Most are under 20 on Amazon, but one in particular And you know how you and I are kind of always curious about when they overprice a book, what's in there that I'm not supposed to know about, perhaps. But
Mm-hmm.
one book is Adair's History of the American Indians.
That's the book I'm referencing.
Yeah, it's well, I'm sorry. I was
No, you're
I
fine.
was trying to listen and do a little bit of research on the side at the same time, so I apologize if I missed that point. It's $107 on Amazon. Looks like there's only one left in stock as a hardcover. Um,
And I believe the
but,
copyright is 1775.
yeah, but he didn't know what he was looking at. I mean, he was
You
only
know,
right there, right?
right. Now, James Adair argued that southeastern tribes, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Natchez, had
Mhm.
laws, rituals, and linguistic features as the same or resembling the Israelites. They had Sabbath keeping, purification rites, separation of women during menstruation, and cities of refuge that they color coded. He took this as evidence of Israelite descent, right? Like, how are they having the same words and the same rituals if they hadn't ever been exposed in some way? Okay. Early Spanish, French, and English reports described encounters with dark skinned natives, sometimes explicitly noting African features among the tribes, right? And so this is where we get the Black Indians. Some of these tribes that he talked about with these Hebrew traditions were Black Indians.
Hmm.
And we can't pretend like they didn't know what they're saying. They'll tell you they don't know the difference between an African, a Hindu is another one. They'll tell you they don't know the difference between an African and a Hindu, which India was called Hindustan at that time. It was not called India.
Right.
Okay. The region was called India, but there wasn't a country called India. That country was called Hindustan. So they'll tell you that these very learned people, on one hand, they'll say, believe everything they say, right?
Right.
About this history. And then they'll turn around and say, but they couldn't tell the difference between people. So these people were not naive or confused or dumb. They're the experts, the geographers, navigators, soldiers, priests, and map makers. That's who went on these expeditions.
Right.
They'd seen Moors on the battlefield. They'd seen them in Iberian cities. They'd been with Africans in African ports. The Spaniards lived under Moorish rule. They knew exactly what a Moor looked and acted like. So when they sailed here and labeled people Moors, Black Indians, or Jews, because some of these Black Indians got labeled Jews, they knew exactly what they were saying. They had been exposed to Jews many, many times. In Europe, there's lots of writings about Black Jews. Lots.
Right.
So these explorations were works of scholarship. This was what the exploration was. It was their academia. It was their statecraft. Labels mattered to them. So we cannot assume these are oopsie things. Adric found you the book. He
Right.
put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I
Okay,
saw that, and
so
it says it has one left. It's 82 bucks. It's one left. You guys need to go grab it.
go grab it. Somebody get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to watch another little video.
What did the original Jews of London and Amsterdam actually look like? In a 1600s book entitled Travels in Holland, the Jews of Amsterdam are described in this manner. Their men are most black, full of hair, and insatiably given unto women. In a 1700s book by John Mackey, a man of London, England, named Daniel Earl of Nottingham, who happened to be the Secretary of State, is described as a tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew. In an 1800s book by Robert Knox, the London Jew is described as having lips very full, mouth projecting, chin small, and the whole physiognomy, when swarthy, as it often is, has an African look. James named Shapiro, a professor at Columbia University, states in his book that when Minister Robert Kirk visited a London synagogue in 1690, all 200 Jewish worshippers at the synagogue were black men.
I'm sorry.
So,
The first thing that he said was
yes, insatiable unto
insatiably
women.
given to women. I'm like, man, we
I
just
knew
can't
I knew
escape it.
somebody would catch that part.
Good grief.
They like the ladies. I don't.
They like to use the ladies' man.
Yeah.
Hey, ladies.
So these European people knew exactly who a Jew was and who a Jew was not. So when we talk about the racial reclassification, right? Oh, by the way, I looked it up. What I looked up said that when we look at the transatlantic slave trade en masse, started in 1700. So it went
So you're saying
1700 to
so you're
1809.
describing the large uptick in
Right, where they made it,
in
they
slave
turned it
trade.
into a business, not just
Okay,
we're bringing people from here and there.
gotcha.
Okay, so 18th to 19th centuries, the 1700s to 1800s, census and government records began collapsing multiple identities into Negro. So this is starting in the 1700s. The Nipmuc of Massachusetts brought that in. They were recorded as Indian in the 1860 census. And then in the 1870 census, just 10 years later, they were colored. So total erasure of Native identity. Numerous Eastern tribes, the Lumbee, the Narragansett, the Mashpee, and the Nottoway, for examples, show similar transitions from Indian to either Negro or mulatto on records, despite all of their traditions identifying them as Native and Hebrew descended.
Hmm,
So
okay.
some of them said themselves they were Hebrew descended.
Believe people when they tell you who they are, right?
Right. Believe people when they tell you who they are. So we are almost at the 2-hour mark. We have a ton more information. I think this is going to take at least 2 more videos because we're just, we had to take all that time to make the point of the indigenous Black Indians, and we're just getting into the Hebrew part of that. So if you're okay with that, we'll
Yes.
schedule another one.
Yeah, I'm completely fine with that. This is a good topic. It's kind of daunting because you kind of feel like you're venturing out into the unknown, you know.
Yeah.
Like this is the area outside the Oort cloud, you know. Um,
Right.
Where do we go from here? I was kind of struck with a little bit of sadness that how they were able to successfully collapse all these many diverse and beautiful people into just a color,
Right.
just black, and thus again effectively erasing their history, and even more in a way. Something else that makes me even more sad is how even to this day, those who are some of those who are Black American who argue against what we're trying to discover, how much they've bought into this.
Right. That there
You
were
know,
no Black people here until Europeans shipped them in from Africa.
right?
And
Yeah.
so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that like we just didn't know anything about boats, on
Right.
our own.
You didn't fish or nothing.
There was never Phoenicians in North Africa, for example.
Right.
Screw
Never
those
happened.
guys, right?
And the maize just got to Africa.
Right, it just floated over,
It was a hurricane.
right.
So, what I was going to say was, so my thinking always has been like the way Black people have been treated from the first time we hear about, the enslavement, the oppression, all of these things. it sounds more biblical, and it sounds more like prisoners of war. And if we look at that, the original enslaved people were natives who were Black Indians who were relabeled as Black so that they could be enslaved. They literally were prisoners of war because this was a hostile takeover of a land, right? So, oh, we may have lost Adrian, or at least lost his camera. So, oh, yep, we did. Okay, so I appreciate Adrian being here. He's a fantastic resource. We have a bunch of really nerdy conversations and research rabbit holes, and it's very, very, very fun. Hi.
Hi,
So,
technology, gotta love it.
yeah, they wanted you to stop talking.
Right.
Just
Get
stop
him
talking.
out of here.
Right.
Right.
Shut up, you.
Right.
Okay, so I think we have no next Sunday. I'm talking about the Japhethites again. There's some proof about the Japhethites, but we will schedule part 2 and probably a part 3 on the missing Hebrews. And to be clear, we're not saying people are so all or nothing. We are not saying that the only Native Americans were Black.
Right.
There were a variety of Native Americans that included Black people. Let's
Right.
not, we're not going to all lives matter this shit, right? Like it
Right.
includes Black people. Okay. And it's okay to say that. And we're also not saying that all 13 tribes of Israel were for sure 100% all Black people who are the ADOS people who are in the United States.
Right.
We're not saying that either, but it is pretty definite that the ADOS people are Hebrew people if they are a descendant of slavery, simply because that's the people who were targeted in Africa.
Right.
So they would be Hebrew people. And so that's what we're getting at. And I want people to kind of to understand that, and we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater or saying it only includes certain people. That's kind of been the problem since the beginning, that the only Jews are Ashkenazi Jews, right? And that it can't possibly be anybody else. Well, we have to maintain an open mind and look, and what we're specifically talking about is not so much Jews from Judea, which is one tribe of Israel, but the Hebrews,
And
the
I think that you're
descendants of
saying,
Eber.
I I think that you're saying this as well, which is that the Atlantic slave trade just wasn't a simple affair, right? It was
Right.
very complex.
It
There
was
was a lot of
complex.
people. Yeah, there was a lot of people who were enslaved, and because there were Black people over here, and because we can see that there's books that exist and scholarship behind, this whole idea of reclassification, some people were erased and given convenient justification to be included into the numbers of who was enslaved. Again, the papal bulls, which there was no distinction between religion and government as far as Europe was concerned. The government was the church.
Well, this is when we still had the Holy Roman Emperor.
Absolutely.
So yes, and the
Yeah.
emperor, all of the monarchs deferred to the emperor,
Hmm.
and he was housed in Germany at that time.
Hmm. Hmm. So it was very complex, and it bears fleshing out. And but again, to your original point of even trying to make these distinctions, or give these caveats, we have, you said all or nothing, I say black and white, kind of way that we try to process this information. And I think that's because it alleviates um, critical thought. We don't have to think
Mhm.
too critically about this.
Right. And otherism is just too popular right now. Like,
mhm,
oh, some Jews did this, well then we hate Jews, or some black
right.
people did this, we hate black people. You know, um, we want we everybody is so beat down at this point that we just want to know who to be mad at,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Point me in the
And
direction.
right, and things are much more complicated than that. Leon brings up a good point where, when the I think it was Ethiopian Jews, were trying to be recognized by Israel, and then they got classified as beta Jews.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
we're the real Jews, you guys are just beta Jews. You're second place Jews. That's what that
Right.
says. You are second place. Right? When these people from Ethiopia were probably have more of a claim to Eber, to being Hebrew and being an Israelite, than Ashkenazi Jews of European descent.
Right. They might actually be a part of the Mizrahi,
Yes.
which were before the Sephardim, and before and to your point, before the Ashkenazi, definitely,
Right. Way before Ashkenaz.
exactly.
All right. So I appreciate everybody being here. This where there's not going to be a Keys of Enoch this Wednesday because I'm traveling. Next Sunday will be proof of what I've been saying about the Japhethites. And then Adrian and I will schedule part 2 for the missing Hebrews and continue to talk about ADOS or FBA, Black Americans being both Black Indians and mixed with Black Hebrews from Africa. So hope you guys have finished and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And before I forget, I love you, I miss you, and you're my favorite. Now I'm going to show you a picture of my dog. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together.